currently the focus of NATO is in the Arab world. Now, my question is mostly for Ben and Elizabeth. What is NATO currently doing to overcome the severe deficit of trust and possibly legitimacy, especially coming the Iraq War? What are we currently doing to kind of overcome that in reaching out to the Arab world?
Sure. I can offer a few thoughts. I think in both the Arab world and in Afghanistan, there's a very complicated relationship that is associated with trust. It's manifested, I think, most clearly right now in Afghanistan because there's obviously an ongoing conflict there. And on the one hand, you have very much a demand for engagement by NATO. The Afghans understand that there's a need for an international security force to continue to blunt the momentum of the Taliban and create space for their own government to get stronger. And there's also a need for NATO and the unique capabilities that NATO has to train their security forces. On the other hand, when you have the presence of foreign troops for so long, sovereignty issues become more and more important, and it begins to grate. And that's a normal tension, and it's to be expected that, again, people would want to determine their own destiny, just like every country represented here on stage. So there's this balance between a desire for NATO to help fix the challenges in Afghanistan and in the broader region in some respects, but then there's a resistance to feeling like you're giving up sovereignty for that. So that's the tension that we're seeking to mitigate. In Afghanistan, that's why this framework that we have is so important, the handover to the Afghans, because it says, here's the timeline under which you're going to get back full sovereignty, full responsibility for your country, so you can see it. Yes, we're going to be here for a period of time because we believe, and you believe too, that we need to be here to help, again, make sure there are no terrorist safe havens. But you can see in a very methodical way how this war is going to end. And the plan that we've reached on transition maps out, literally, here are the districts, here are the provinces going to transition. And so ultimately, if we can show that we're moving in that direction of restoring full Afghan sovereignty and responsibility for their country, I think we can, again, get at that trust issue and that unease at giving up sovereignty. I think in the Arab world, more broadly, Libya has the potential to be a significant event in the sense that you had a demand from an Arab populace, an Arab public, for essentially NATO and the West to intervene, which is unusual given the recent history in the region. And what was so unique about Libya is we didn't put forces on the ground. It was the Libyans who did the work on the ground. What NATO did is, from the air, we created zones around the country where civilians were protected, and they could organize, and they could have space, and they weren't being murdered by the regime. And then they themselves, on the ground, ended the Gaddafi regime, which is an interesting model. And no two interventions are the same. But this concept, again, of NATO supporting people as they fulfilled their aspirations, again, was an interesting model that built trust. And I think if you were probably to poll Arab countries, the country that has the most trust in NATO right now would probably be Libya, which is interesting. But again, I think it's always a balance where there's a demand for NATO action, NATO engagement, but then with that NATO engagement comes, again, a sense of a loss of sovereignty, and that's what we need to balance. And that's where the partnership thing comes in. Because here we can go to nations in the region and say, we're not going to do this for you. We want to be partners with you, equal partners. We want to have countries in the Arab world, starting with those who joined us in Libya, like the UAE and Qatar and Jordan, but potentially other countries. Who knows, maybe potentially a democratic Libya at some point. Be partners with NATO so that they can see a relationship where we're equals. And it's not simply us dictating terms, but it's us sitting around a table and working out with them how we're going to deal with common challenges. So I think we have a huge opportunity here in the coming years as we've already wound down Iraq, as we wind down the war in Afghanistan and transition sovereignty and responsibility there to the Afghans. and we build these partnerships to have a different type of relationship with that part of the world than we've had these last 10 years.
I'll just add one point, which is that there are 2 NATO allies who have significant Muslim populations. One is a new ally, Albania. The other is Turkey, huge country, straddling a bridge between the West and the East. And just last week, the Turks requested to brief NATO on the situation in Syria. And they have been a critically important partner for us in much of the work we have been doing in the Arab Spring. The President has invested a great deal in the development of a constructive working relationship with Prime Minister Erdogan. And we see that as a very important element of ensuring that NATO is viewed as a partner rather than as an adversary in the region that you're describing.